So our goal tonight is to present information on the Greater Vernon water supply and to present information on how the current situation is impacting residents and businesses and other users. And as Terry mentioned, on November the 15th, the $70 million borrowing referendum was soundly defeated by the citizens of Greater Vernon, not only based on costs, but also based on the decision to treat a mainly agricultural water supply to drinking water standards. Now, just a little on the background of who looks after our water. Water supply and treatment in Vernon is a regional district function, while water distribution is a municipal government function. So decisions made regarding water supply and treatment are made by local government representatives through the Greater Vernon Advisory Committee, whose decisions are sent to the Regional District Board for their consideration. Greater Vernon Water is the operating arm of the water system, and it's staffed by personnel working for the Regional District. Now, the Master Water Plan is a planning document, and it outlines future water supply, treatment, and distribution for the community. The first plan was completed in 2002. It was then updated in 2012. And a key direction of the plan is to treat the Dudo Creek system to supply not only agricultural quality water, but a substantial quantity of the area's domestic water supply. Well, from the Regional District website, there's a statement that says, the primary goal is to ensure the economical supply and distribution of a sufficient quantity and quality of water in the interests of both agricultural and non-agricultural users in the Greater Vernon community. What is economical to some is uneconomical to most, as evidenced by the current water rate structure for residential and all other users. Now, the Dudo Creek Water Treatment Plant first phase was completed in 2010 at a cost of $29.3 million, and that provides clarification, which is really color and solids removal of the surface water supply that is provided for the treatment plant. An additional $30 million has been spent on pipeline separation projects. The plant improves the aesthetic quality of the source water, and it also provides chlorination to protect against most waterborne diseases. This treatment, however, does not satisfy the drinking water objectives from Interior Health Authority for potability, and further treatment must be provided if that supply is to be used for potable purposes to a large extent. So since 2010, when the plant went into operation, the water rates have had a direct negative economic impact on water users in the Greater Vernon area. And those rates have now become a hardship for many businesses and residents who are having difficulties in paying their water bills. And I'm sure there's many of you that fall into that category tonight. The net result is brown lawns, lawns converted to rocks, and a decreased real estate aesthetic value because citizens cannot afford to water their lawns anymore, and businesses that may be considering moving away from the area. Now, this slide shows what has happened to the water rates between 2003 and 2014. Maybe kind of hard to see the slide. The first bar here is 2003, and the last one is 2014. So in 2003, the annual cost was just under $300. It's now $900 per year, based on a water consumption of 350 cubic meters. Now, up until recently, 350 cubic meters was very standard for our area, but because of the high water rates, the usage has now dropped substantially, and I'll show a slide on that later. So if we looked at a typical annual residential water bill in the city of Vernon, and I just picked 4 different years here, 2010 up to 2014, and the usage in each of those years. Now the usage is measured in cubic meters because we're in the metric age. 1 cubic meter is equal to 220 gallons. So you can relate to that. So the cost, the annual cost in 2010 was about $534. In 2014, it's now $841 for that same amount. So if you take that as a cost per cubic meter, the cost has risen from $1.33 up to $2.65 in just 4 years. According to the Greater Vernon water people, the cost to provide water is currently about 60 cents per cubic meter. And we're paying $2.65 per cubic meter. Now, for the past several years, the Water Authority has been charging a residential base fee, and that fee has been escalating rapidly, so that in this year, as of April the 1st, the base fee is now $101.80 per 3 months. And that's for no water consumption at all. For the consumption, there's an increasing block rate structure, and I can show a slide that talks about that rate structure later on. For business customers, the same base fee applies, plus there's a charge based on the size of their water meter, and plus a consumption charge. Now, all of these rates are available on the Regional District website if you wanted to have a closer look at them. So what that means is that for residences in this area, the base fee is now $407 per year for no water usage at all. And that $407 is higher than the annual metered cost in Kelowna. And it defeats the conservation goal of installing water meters, which we have done over the past many years. So this is what has happened since 2003 for the base rate and the consumption rate. So as I mentioned, it's been escalating rapidly over the past several years. In 2003, it was $99 per quarter, and it's now $407.20, as I mentioned. The consumption rate back in 2003 was 70 cents per cubic meter, and then in 2012, the increasing block rate structure went into effect, which means that the more water you use, the more you pay per cubic meter. So this year, the low rate is 51 cents for the first 10 cubic meters. And it escalates rapidly after that, up to $2.19 per cubic meter. So for a homeowner who only uses a very small amount of water, and 30 cubic meters of water in the first 3 months of the year is quite common. So the base fee now of $101.80 accounts for an astounding 82% of their $123 water bill before any charge applies for water usage. So the high water costs are not only impacting citizens and businesses, they're negatively impacting agricultural production, all of which is making Vernon less competitive with other Okanagan cities as a place to live, conduct business, and to grow our food supply. The problem is, though, as costs continue to escalate, users are reducing their consumption. And that results in even a higher base fee and consumption costs per cubic meter in order for Greater Vernon Water to meet its revenue needs. So it's a revolving cycle. We have now reduced our water usage in the greater Vernon area, at least in the city of Vernon, to about 175 cubic meters per year from what they were years ago as high as 350. That reduction is not just because of conservation efforts which have been substantial in this area over the past 20 years. The big reduction in usage is directly related to cost. But what I've done is compared our water rates with other cities. And this is where you can see a very startling comparison. Kelowna, based on the 2014 water rates they charge and the 350 cubic meters of water used during the year, their residents only pay $291. Penticton is about $427, Kamloops $428, Vernon $900, 3 times Kelowna. And I just put in a couple of other examples in the Lower Mainland, Port Moody and Langley, both of which have filtered water from the Seymour Capilano water treatment plant, which is the finest water treatment plant in the world. Based on membrane filtration, the water quality is extremely high. Their rates are still only half of what we're paying, and we have no filtration. As I mentioned, the latest results show that Vernon residents are using only about 180 cubic meters per year now compared to what they were using in several years ago, and a large factor in that reduction is the water costs. So if we applied the new water rates in 2015, which by the way are 2% higher than the 2014 rates, that 180 cubic meters that we're using per year will cost Vernon residents $604. The same water usage in Kelowna will be only $218. Again, we're paying almost 3 times what Kelowna charges, even at the lower usage figures. And Kelowna residents meet all the drinking water objectives because they pump water for one of their main water intakes from Okanagan Lake, which requires very, very little treatment because of its low turbidity, and all they do is disinfect with ultraviolet to meet all of the drinking water objectives. And that's why their water rates are so much lower than ours. For the industrial, commercial, and institutional users, as I mentioned, the same infrastructure fee applies as residential, plus the charge based on the meter size, plus a consumption charge. Whereas in Kelowna, they charge their industrial users a flat rate based on the meter size, plus a consumption charge. There's no base fee at all. And so this slide shows the comparison between the two cities for an industrial account. For a 1-inch meter, and using 100 cubic meters per quarter, and this is just a number that I picked in order to develop the comparison. In Vernon, the meter fee is $84. In Kelowna, it's only $56. Our industrial people pay $101 base fee. Kelowna pays nothing. And for the consumption, we would pay $153 and they pay $47. So the total cost then for the quarter is $339 in Vernon and $104 in Kelowna. Again, 3 times higher in Vernon. So the economic question really is, why does our water cost so much compared to other communities? And part of the reason is that millions and millions of dollars have been spent in promoting and treating an agricultural water supply to be used for domestic purposes, and millions more dollars are being put into reserves to bring that agricultural water supply up to potable standards. When the plant was built out on Whitevale Road, the capacity was rated at about 160 megaliters per day. Now, a megaliter is 1,000,000 liters, or 1,000 cubic meters. That's about 33 to 35 million gallons per day. Now in the summer, when crops are being irrigated, the demand can go as high as 210 megaliters per day. And for that reason, at least 60 megaliters per day of irrigation water needs to be supplied with new pipes that would bypass the treatment plant, and that cost an additional $19 million. And we looked at the water use data for the first few years after that Dudo Creek plant was put into operation. And on peak summer days, only 4% of that water was used for domestic purposes. 96% was used on agricultural lands. So that begs the question, why are we treating the Dudo Creek water to supply mainly irrigation water? Crops don't need potable water. Now, if we looked at the Dudo Creek system in isolation, it has some water quality concerns. It's a surface water supply coming from lakes in the Lavington, Lumbee area. It has high turbidity. Turbidity is really a measure of the cloudiness of water, and it's a key water quality parameter that we talk about today. So it's got high turbidity. It's brown colored, as many of you will know. It's got sediments, especially during the summer. And because the treatment plant in Dudo Creek only uses chlorine as a disinfectant and does not filter out organic matter, then the water can contain compounds that we call trihalomethanes. Now, trihalomethanes are a considerable concern to us, and Health Canada has stated that we can have too high a level of trihalomethanes in our water, the principal one being chloroform. Health Canada has reported a link between exposure to trihalomethanes and colorectal cancers. And every year since 1977, the Dudo Creek system has exceeded the Canadian drinking water guidelines for total trihalomethanes, in some cases over twice the limit. Now, at the Dudo Creek water treatment plant, there's a compound called polyaluminum chloride. It's called PAC for short, and it's a coagulant, and it's used to flocculate or bring together the solids that are present in the Dudo Creek water and rise them to the surface in a process called dissolved air flotation. The problem is that when you're using a product with aluminum, some of that aluminum gets carried over into the treated water supply. So the results show that the total aluminum level in the treated water at Dudo Creek is at least double the recommended guideline in the Canadian drinking water guidelines. Now, aluminum is not a health-based parameter. It's an aesthetic parameter. There's a lot of information out there about possible connections between aluminum and Alzheimer's. There's as many studies that have concluded that there is a direct connection as there is studies that have said there is no connection. For that reason, the Canadian Drinking Water Guidelines has established a limit of 0.1 milligrams per liter for total aluminum in drinking water across Canada. If you look at the 2013 annual report from Greater Vernon Water, you'll see that many of the results are higher than 0.1. In fact, what they have done on the annual report table is listed the recommended maximum level at 0.2, which is double what the Canadian Drinking Water Guidelines list, which is 0.1. Whether that was an honest mistake or not, I'm not sure. Kalamalka Lake, on the other hand, has never reached the 0.1 milligram per liter for aluminum. Now, because only chlorine is used for disinfection at Dudo Creek, it has some limitations. It does not inactivate Cryptosporidium or Giardia. And these are two parasites that can attack our intestines and can result in sickness in some people who do not have an active immune system, or babies, or even HIV positive people. So chlorine has its limitations. The Kalamalka Lake system, which we call the Mission Hill Water Treatment Plant, it uses ultraviolet disinfection, which kills both Cryptosporidium and Giardia. So in that sense, Kalamalka Lake water is of higher quality. It's also higher quality because we don't use aluminum. So because of the lower organic level in the Kalamalka Lake supply, all the trihalometane results since 2003 have been well below the Canadian drinking water guidelines. In spite of all this, Greater Vernon Water has switched twice this year from the Kalamalka Lake supply, which supplies water to most of Vernon, to the Dudo Creek supply, based mainly on a turbidity reading. We have asked for those turbidity readings on numerous occasions and they have not been provided. And there's an article in last Sunday's Morning Star that says they will now be switching from one source to the other in the future without public notification because so many people don't look at newspapers and watch notices and so on. So what they're saying is that they're going to put you onto the Dudo Creek system if you live in the city of Vernon without you knowing. But when it comes to costs per megaliter to treat water, because so much of the Dudo Creek water is used for irrigation during summer months, the treatment costs are lower in the summer, but they're exceptionally high in the winter when most of the uses are for domestic purposes. There's fixed costs, in other words, that have to be paid whether they're treating water in the summer or in the winter. So in the winter, it costs about $360 to treat a megaliter of water at the Dudo Creek plant and only $83 at Cal Lake, and similar readings for the summer months. So it's much higher to treat water at the Dudo Creek system than it is from the Kalamalka Lake system. The protection of water rates for the agricultural irrigation have buffered farmers from the increased water rates, but there's this devastating economic effect for domestic and non-domestic customers in Vernon, as well as other irrigation-dependent businesses such as golf courses. And this is a slide that shows what it has cost the Hillview Golf Course for water. Starting in 2008, they were paying 25 cents per cubic meter. This year, it's risen to 89 cents. So this year, they'd be paying $43,000 for water from Greater Vernon Water to irrigate that small golf course in the eastern part of our city. This increase of 356% in 7 years prompted Hillview to drill a well. And they have asked that should that well malfunction, they be allowed to use the Greater Vernon water as a reserve, and to do that they will have to pay the same allocation fee as everyone else, costing quite a few $1,000s as well. This is a comparison of golf courses in the Okanagan and what they pay for their water. And some of the larger golf courses only paying somewhere between $3,000 and $17,000. Spalumcheen pays $15,000, that includes pumping. Predator Ridge, as some of you will know, used reclaimed water from the city of Vernon. And when we negotiated that agreement back in the 80s with Predator Ridge, the concept was that we would provide the city's reclaimed water to their property boundary at no cost. And that remained the same for several years until the city decided that they would start charging Predator Ridge based on a percentage of what fresh water would cost. Last year, they were paying 80% of the cost of fresh water for their reclaimed water, and it was going to 100% this year. The city made a decision to leave it at 80%. So Predator would have paid $190,000 if they were irrigating with potable water. Now you compare $190,000 with all the other golf courses in the Okanagan, and you can see why there's a major concern with golf courses. Where did Greater Vernon water go wrong? The wrong source was chosen to treat. Now we know that Kalamalka and Okanagan Lake have much better raw water quality than Dudo, as the previous slides showed, and require less treatment. So they're also large, deep, natural reservoirs, and they're not vulnerable to yearly fluctuations in supply as the Dudo system is. Retreating glaciers left very thick gravel deposits beneath the lakes. Kalamalka Lake has a maximum depth of about 142 meters, and below that there's another 538 meters of water-bearing gravel below the lake bottom before reaching bedrock. So with this deep gravel layer, the bedrock is 680 meters below the lake's surface, and that's significant for water quality. By contrast, the upland lakes that supply the Dudo Creek system, they're relatively shallow, and they contain less than 1% of the volume of water in Kalamalka Lake. The Dudo system experienced extreme low flows twice due to the lack of runoff from snowmelt and other input sources. And this slide just shows Cal Lake at the north end and Aberdeen Lake. So maximum depth of Aberdeen is 18 meters and an average depth of 7 meters, whereas Cal Lake has a maximum depth of 142 meters and an average depth of 58 meters. So the high variability in new water inflow from year to year based on snowpack, it makes our upland water reservoirs more risky sources than large lakes. So in times of drought, there's just insufficient water to fill the reservoir to meet the demands. And that one of those lakes has dried up, as many of you know, twice in recent memory. There was a recent report about mudboggers tearing up the areas around the reservoirs supplying water to the Dudo Creek system because the watershed is open to the public. Again, contamination is very possible. So if we looked at the natural filtering of water, because of these gravel deposits and groundwater flow path coming up to Cal and Okanagan Lakes, this is the water table here, so all of that water gets filtered through the gravels before it enters the lakes. Now in the master water plan that was completed in 2012, it's a series of 9 technical memoranda. And two of them point to Okanagan Lake as the most reliable future source of water to meet the long-term growth of this area. And in fact, the memorandum number 3 recommended that a water license from Okanagan Lake for 50,000 megaliters per year should be obtained. To our knowledge, that has not been acted on. So why not plan now for the long-term future? I've mentioned Kelowna and how one of their water sources is to pump directly from Okanagan Lake. And because of the low turbidity, the only treatment required for that source is ultraviolet. And that costs less than $10 million for a similar sized population to the Greater Vernon area. It would appear that we're going to be paying in excess of $100 million to provide potable water before all the costs are in. So what we feel, and as Terry mentioned earlier, we want a fresh new look to be undertaken for the master water plan. We feel that water rates should be returned to affordable levels. The provincial drinking water objectives need to be met, and we need a secure, reliable, long-term supply of potable and irrigation water. Dudo Creek should be returned to agricultural usage as it was intended, and Kalamalka Lake and Okanagan Lakes should be used solely for potable uses. In order to have this fresh new look, we feel that an independent consultant should be retained to confirm the feasibility of these ideas and to provide a conceptual design and an order of magnitude cost analysis. The water rates should be revamped to make them competitive with other Okanagan areas for all of our users. And we recommend that we return to the incentive to reduce water usage by metering instead of having base fees which account for the majority of water bills. And I can quote from a statement that's made in the 2013 annual report from Greater Vernon Water, and basically says that research has shown that by rewarding low water users with a lower rate, tiered domestic rates promote water conservation. We haven't seen that in this area because most of our water rates come from a base fee which does not account for any usage whatsoever. Water rates are prohibitive. We know that. Many of our citizens are expressing their concern, especially those on fixed income. The public does not want to have water treated at high cost and mostly used for irrigation. And we know that our domestic rates have skyrocketed. An example of the unintended consequences of a poor decision, the hardships made by golf courses that I mentioned. So some of the action items in closing, what we would like to see is to change the point of diversion on all available water licenses so that the Kalamalka Lake system, with a new license from Okanagan Lake, can adequately supply all of the domestic demands for this area for the next 50 years. Upgrade the size and the intake of the Cal Lake system to meet future demands. We feel that by extending it out to deeper water, it will have better raw water quality and it won't be affected by the sediments that come down from Coldstream Creek. And we can apply for a filtration deferral based on raw water quality. That's exactly what the city of Kelowna did. Based on the raw water quality of the Okanagan Lake, they do not have to filter their water. Filtration is a requirement on the Dudo Creek system because of the raw water quality. We feel that switch as many domestic users as possible to the Cal Lake source for now, and to determine the best use, future use for the Dudo Creek plant, including providing redundancy for other systems and using its source water primarily for irrigation. And determine a strategy to supply domestic water to the remote customers east of the city. And also, aggressive measures in the Cal Lake watershed should be implemented to protect the source water from threats such as agricultural runoff, septic system leaching, invasive species, nutrient loading, and algal blooms in order to lower the turbidity levels and defer filtration of the Cal Lake source as long as possible. Thanks for this opportunity, and I'll turn it back to Terry now.
Thanks very much, Eric. Thank you, Eric.